We're doing a new study. We're starting a new study on the book of Ruth. We are going to, over the next 4 weeks, pick a chapter, and we're going to cover a chapter every Sunday of the book of Ruth. And if you have a Bible, turn with me to Ruth chapter 1. If you don't have your Bible, please raise your hand, and someone from the Connect team will get you a Bible. I'll be reading from the ESV version. And quick overview about the book of Ruth. As I was studying for this, I found this great, really, example from John Piper. He summarizes the book of Ruth, and I loved it, so I'm going to read it to you. Here's what he says about the book of Ruth. This is a story for people who wonder where God is, where there are no dreams, no visions, and no prophets. A story for people who wonder where God is when tragedy attacks your faith. It's a story for people who wonder if there's any point in being a person of integrity in the hardest of all times, when it looks like you may as well join the crowd and throw away your integrity. And it's a story for people who can't imagine that anything great could ever come out of your ordinary life of faith. So if that's you today, I think this book's going to resonate with you. I think this book's going to resonate with a lot of us here today. So I hope it's a blessing. So we're going to pray, and then we're going to read all of chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. So join me in prayer. Jesus, again, we thank you for the opportunity to open your word, to study the Bible. The wisdom, the truths we see here that were written long ago, we're grateful for this, that so many generations have learned. I pray right now as we're here that your Spirit would guide us through it, that you, Lord, would speak through me, that this message, this morning, this service would be all to bring you glory and to help us understand you better, know your love better, Lord. I pray that this passage challenges us, that it drives us to do better, that it shows us how to be bold, that it shows us how to love you and cling to you, Lord, when times get tough. So I thank you for this morning, and I pray for this study in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, I'm going to read from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, the entire chapter, so bear with me. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived in there about 10 years, and Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she went out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will not return. We will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I sons in the womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. If you go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night, and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they're grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." They lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. And I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. All right, well, let's dig into it. I love that here in our church we go through the Bible. We have expository teaching, which means we have a passage and we go through it verse by verse, whereas sometimes, a lot of churches, even sometimes here, we do topical series, which will pick a topic and pick a lot of verses around it and kind of talk about the topic. But I really do like here that the goal, because we want to teach you to be students of the Bible, the goal is to go through the Bible verse by verse to teach you how maybe you should study it, how you should look at it, how we can learn from it. So to honor that, to go through this chapter, through the book of Ruth, and for us to get the most out of it, I will go verse by verse, and starting in verse 1, to give you context, it talks about this being during the time of Judges. The time of Judges was a 400-year time period, that was after Joshua, the book of Joshua, when Joshua brought the Israelites into the promised land. It was after that, but it was before they had kings. So it was that period of time, for there was the first 5 books of the Bible, we had Joshua, then we had Judges, and the book of Ruth happened sometime in between there. This story here, somewhere in between the book of Judges and Samuel, where Samuel anointed the first king. This era, the era of Judges, you may have heard of it. There are people like Gideon, Samson, people who had great stories, and there's also something very sad about the time of Judges. The book of Judges is described by a phrase, as they say over and over, is that in that time everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So something bad would happen, and the people would cry out to God, and God would give them, out of mercy, he would raise up a judge and send mercy, and there would be peace. But that didn't last very long, because there's this cycle that people kept going through. There's sin, and then they beg for mercy, they plead for mercy, and then there is mercy, and then there's peace, and it just keeps going over and over. I made a little chart to show you a little circle on the slide. There we go. It happened for 400 years. It would be very easy for us to judge them and say, do these people not learn? Do they not know what they're doing? They kept doing this over and over again. And yes, they did it over and over. But let me remind you, don't we do the same thing all the time? Do we not fall into the same traps and fall into the same sin in our lives over and over and over? If someone wrote a book about us, and my grandchild read that book, of all the times I've messed up, he would have been like, man, Grandpa, you're dumb. You did that again? And then 6 months again? And then, we all do this over and over. It's our sin nature. We are fallen creatures. We're stubborn and we want what we want. And we do have a certain cycle here. Now, what's different here with this time, the time of Judges, is that there was wickedness in the whole nation. People did do what was right in their own eyes. And this is where this book picks up. Somewhere in this time, somewhere during the book of Judges, in the middle of trouble, in the middle of people doing whatever they thought was right, is where we pick up Ruth. Now, the cool thing about this book, it gives us a glimpse of the good things God was doing during these times. We read the book of Judges and we see the cycle, and they were enslaved, and then they were free and enslaved and free, and we get to see some parts of the good things that God was doing, hidden, just little things, and who knows how many more things like this God did. We follow the story of Naomi, yes, this woman that was widowed and lost her 2 sons. She's in a strange land. We also see Ruth, who lost her husband, and she doesn't have any kids. All she has is her mother-in-law. And as we read the story, and I'm going to skip ahead, we read the story, and we see this really great redemption where Ruth follows Naomi to Bethlehem. She gets to meet a man, she gets to remarry, and she has a son. And that itself there would be an amazing redemption story. Look at the faith Ruth had, and she clung to her mother-in-law, and she had hope, and she got to remarry, she had a son, what she wanted all along. That is great. And we could end it there. But it gets way better when you realize who her son was. His name was Obed. Obed, later became the father to a man named Jesse. Jesse became the father to 10 kids, one of which was David. David, the greatest king in the history of Israel. All because of the faith that Ruth had. All because of the diligence Naomi had. The ancestor to the Messiah was born because of what these ladies did, because they chose to follow the Lord when they could have just given up. And for the rest of the story, I'm going to let us talk about it in the next couple of weeks. But I wanted to give you a glimpse of what was ahead. For now, we are in chapter 1, and we read this passage, very tragic. Right? There's famine in Bethlehem, and the family moves. The husband dies, but the kids remarry, but then the sons die, and now the mother, Naomi's left alone. She has her 2 daughters-in-law, and that's a sad story. But we put our scholar hats on, and we read a little more, and we get to study that things are not really what they seem. See, Bethlehem was a rich agricultural area, so there was no reason for there to be famine. Elimelech led his family to Moab. If we look deeper into this famine in the land, we see specifically where God says there wasn't going to be any famine in the land. Let me go to Deuteronomy chapter 11. You guys don't have to go there. Deuteronomy chapter 11, verses 13 through 17. This is God speaking to the nation of Israel, telling them about the promised land where they were at. And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and serve him with all your heart and all your soul, he will give the rain for your land in its season, the early rain and the latter rain, that you may gather your grain and your wine and your oil, and he will give grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens so that there will be no more rain, and the land will yield no fruit. You will perish quickly off the good land the Lord has given you. So we see that the Lord said, if you obey me, the land will have plenty for you and your family to live. What happened? Well, this is the time of Judges. They didn't obey the Lord. They did what was right in their own eyes. So famine hit the promised land, the land of Israel. And yet, even when the Lord said, this is your place and you guys will be here, and they went through everything in the book of Exodus, a lot of things just to stay here, to get here. And this all starts with this man Elimelech saying, yeah, I know the Lord called me here, but over there looks pretty good too. I think I'm going to go over there instead. I'm having tough times here. I don't really want to go through it. I'm gonna go my own way. This word here that they used for him, it was the word sojourn. And this word in the Hebrew means to temporarily dwell. He said he was going to go on this, kind of like people go for a week to San Diego, right, for a vacation. We're going to, it's famine. Let's just go for a little while. Let's move away for a little bit and like we would, get away from the heat. But this trip seems like it was going to be more permanent. I have a map here. For them to go from Bethlehem to Moab, they had to hike through the desolate Jericho Pass, through the Judean wilderness near the Dead Sea, going across the Jordan River, which wasn't easy, into the land of Moab. So this seems like a lot of work for a quick trip. It makes me think it really wasn't a quick trip. The issue here is that the Lord called them to be set apart, to not go to these other places, to stay here and to trust that he was going to provide for them, that he was going to care for them. It was a sign of lack of faith from Elimelech. And whether his family agreed or not, he led his family to this place. He returned to the wilderness which God had delivered the Israelites from hundreds of years before. Something I find interesting too, in English we don't read it, but when you look into what names mean in Hebrew, his name Elimelech means God is king. And I think it's interesting that that's his name because he was not living a life as if God was king, which should show us something, that appearances aren't everything, titles aren't everything. The title Christian, follower of Christ. Have you ever met a Christian that wasn't very Christian? A follower of Christ that was following someone, but it wasn't Christ. Titles aren't everything. Appearances aren't what they seem, which should urge us. I want to warn all of us. If we claim Christ, we have to live like Christ is our King. Because you don't know how you may be messing up someone else's faith by your bad habits, by your bad attitude, by your disobedience, by your sin. And isn't that attitude of Elimelech, I'm just going to go over here, I'm going to see what happens. Let's just take a little trip. Isn't that how sin always starts? It's always just a curiosity. What's over here? What happens if there's a line right here? What happens if I go right here? Is that sin? I made a reference in first service that I was a youth pastor before, and youth would always ask me that question of where's the line of sin and how close, like here's the line, sex. And they're like, how close can I do it before it's like sin? And I'm like, why are you asking this? I feel like you want a certain answer that you know I'm not going to give you. Right? We want to know where the lines are. We want to know where sin is because we want to be right up next to that line. We want to walk by the line. But that's where we get in trouble. You get so close to sin, you start looking at what's on the other side, and you think, man, it looks better over there. C.S. Lewis has this great quote about how dangerous it is to have that approach towards sin. He says, indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. The safest road to hell is that gradual one. It's not sudden. It's not a sign that says you are entering hell. Right? There's no thing that says you are in sin if you do this. That's what's dangerous about sin is we justify our sin. We think, I don't know if this is really sin. It feels kind of bad, but I don't know if it is bad. Or you know what? Other people do it. Other Christians have done this. Maybe I can do it too. And when you start justifying things, and this is the same thing. But Jesus warns us about this. Matthew 7:13-14. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. And it's not that people who find it are few because they don't want to. It's because people or can't do it. It's because people don't want to find the narrow path. People don't want to do the things that are a little difficult. They want what's easy. We are in a situation and we're uncomfortable. I don't like this. I want to leave. I'm in pain. I'm confused. I don't understand. God, what's going on? You know what? Never mind. I'm going to go somewhere else. And that's the problem. We think we know what's right. We think we know what's best for us, so we pick our own path. And here, Proverbs 14:12 says, there's a way that seems right to man, but in the end is the way to death. We think we know what's better. Where has that gotten us? Ourselves without the Lord. We think we know what to do. And I would say, go ahead and try it. Come back in a month or 2 months and tell me how that's been going. Just do things your own way, without the Lord, without seeking Him. The thing that's scary, honestly, is that a lot of us do that. A lot of us in this room will live a life as a Christian, but will still make all the calls. It's only in the really hard, crazy times that we come to the Lord, but everything else, hey, I got this. I know what to do. I read the Bible enough. And we think we know what's best, but we don't know what's best. We are no different than those men in the time of Judges that do what we think is right in our own eyes. And this is true, right? In the end, this way leads to death. From Proverbs 14:12, that happened to Elimelech. He died. When his family came to Moab, they thought life would be easier. It was not. He soon died. His wife Naomi was left to care for the two boys, Mahlon and Chilion. And it's hard to say, honestly, if his death was direct correlation because of him going to Moab. We don't know. It wasn't explicitly said. You can assume. But I know that him leaving his wife, a widow, and his boys without a dad wasn't good. And not even that, they were in a strange land. Brittany and I, we moved to Indiana, and we had friends, great people, but that was still hard to be without family, right? It was a foreign land. There were good things about it, like, the summer wasn't 120 degrees. But it was still hard to not have family, to not have friends close, right? And we know the Lord, and we love the Lord, and I worked at a church, right? But it was still difficult. Imagine this lady in a pagan land with no husband, and she just has her two boys, and they don't know anyone. That can't be good. He shouldn't have done that. He should have known better. He did know better. He chose to not do better. And this lack of wisdom and dependence on the Lord affected the entire family. So let me say this to you men who are leading your households. Everything you do matters. The way you lead or don't lead affects your spouses, it affects your kids, it affects their futures. What you do or don't do, what you say or don't say, it all matters. And he chose to run from God's path instead of clinging to him and admitting he was wrong. Lord, I shouldn't have left. I'm sorry. I'm coming back to you. He didn't. He chose to go through that journey. Not an easy journey, I'm sure, and ended up in Moab, ended up dying. Disobeying didn't work for him. It didn't work for his sons either. In the next few verses 3 to 5, we see that his sons both died. Disobeying God didn't work for them either. As they were getting older, Mahlon and Chilion, they took wives, Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And you may not read into it again. We're trying to read into it. Reading into it, why should I bring that up? Because they weren't supposed to marry Moabite women. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 to 4, Numbers 25, they're specifically told to not intermarry with other people with pagan lands. The issue was that this could lead Israelites to turn away from God, which it did. Moabites worshipped other gods. Moabites specifically worshipped a god named Chemosh. And in the book of 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 26 and 27, we see that the way that they worshipped this god, this Moabite king, he offered his firstborn son as a human sacrifice to this God. And this is what these two boys married into, took in their cultures, right? And it's impossible to think that you can marry someone and not take in their culture, right? I mean, ever since Brittany married me, she eats spicy food now, right? It's part of who you are, right? You marry someone, you're a part of their culture. I eat egg sandwiches now, it's just, you carry some culture over. I like coleslaw, You never know. So God is saying, I know it's going to happen. You will mix with their gods and worship their gods and worship false idols. But they didn't obey. And they married Moabite women, and they ended up dying. And to be a childless widow at this time in life was the worst thing that could happen to a woman. To have no source of stability, income, security, nothing. You are on your own. And as we go on, we see things changing. We are now in verses 6 through 7. We see how Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth traveled to Judah. From distant Moab, Naomi heard that God was doing great things back in Israel. She wanted to be a part of that. She was a part of that at one point. She said, you know what? I have to get back. I have to go back to my place, to my people. And this shows us something, that our walk with the Lord, it has to do something to the people around us. It has to make even other Christians want to come back to the Lord if they've walked away. It should be something that makes other people say, I want some of that. Like, do you ever wonder why Jonathan's always smiling? I don't know. But I want that, Our lives have to encourage people. How did that person get through such hard times in life? They said it was God. I need that. Our relationships with our spouses, how we interact with our kids, our health, how we spend our time, our habits, everything has to reflect the Lord. And people are looking. Whether you think they are or not, people are looking at you. How are we leading them? So Naomi hears of great things happening again, and she says, I have to go back. There's no doubt the Lord is moving in Israel again. I have to go back. So she went out from the place where she was. And that's what's interesting, because many of us here will hear of good things, but do nothing about it. But hopefully, all of you here will hear of good things and step up to those things. You would take a step in your relationship with the Lord. I don't think you should sit here and just want to hear about God. I think some of you want to see God. You want to see God move in your life. I do. That's why I'm here. I want to see God move in my life, in your life. I challenge you all to take a step. You see something you want, Lord, I want that peace. I want your wisdom, Lord. Take a step towards it. That's why I keep pushing every week, and I know some of you are probably frustrated. Every week I talk about those red cards, because every week you guys need to be taking a step closer to the Lord. If you're not taking a step, you're not moving forward. You're not going anywhere. Take a step closer to the Lord. You can't just talk about it. You have to be about it too. I've been talking about, I'm going to call you out, Jonathan. I've been talking about how much I want to get in shape. Like, one day I want to lose some weight. And my friend Jonathan's like, well, go to the gym. No. Well, I mean, I will, just, one day. He's like, well, why not now? Well, I will, just one day. It was why not today? And his I don't know, maybe it wasn't bothering me, but his constant reminders got me to go back to going to the gym, and it was fun, right? It's a lot of what we do is just, it's all mental. Once you start doing, you're like, oh, I like doing this. I like working. I feel good, right? So kudos, Jonathan. You weren't being annoying. You encouraged me. And taking that next step, you know what? I want to lose weight, and that's okay to say. And you all here have this one thing that you want to say, you know what? I want to read my Bible more. I want to learn how to pray better. I want to pray for my coworkers. I want to talk about my faith. What is that thing you need to do? Take that step and do it. Don't just hear about good things happening. Be about those good things happening. Take a step towards those things that are happening. So Naomi gets up, and they go on their way to Judah. And somewhere in the path, she stops, and she looks at her daughters-in-law, and she petitions them to return to Moab. And honestly, that's kind of the wise thing to do, because there's no guarantee that when they return to Bethlehem that they are going to find husbands, right? They are Moabite women. And if Israel is right with the Lord, there's no guarantee that they're not going to shoo these ladies off. I think Naomi's catching on, like, actually, it's probably not best, especially me. Look, she may think she's cursed. My husband died, my kids died. Do you guys really want to be hanging out with me? Do you really want to come back with me? And there's this back and forth. Honestly, for a long time. And these ladies wrestle with it. From verses 8 through 18, 11 verses. Most of this chapter is just that talking back and forth. We want to go with you. No, you should stay. But we want to go with you. No, you should stay. And it was hard for me to understand this type of love a daughter-in-law may have with her mother-in-law. I used to. And when I got married, I got to see the relationship that my mom and my wife has. And I do think it's a really cool one. Like, I am pretty sure if something happens to me, my mom and my wife are still going to have a great relationship, right? I'm actually pretty sure my mom loves my wife more than she loves me, for sure. I made that comment on first service because, like, every time we go eat, whose favorite meal does she cook? It's not mine, it's Brittany's, right? So that bond, that relationship, that's probably what they had. This daughter-in-law who loves her mother-in-law. They just love each other. So parting ways, probably forever, seemed very hard. So it says that she kissed them, they lifted up their voices, they wept. She said this thing that's interesting. I want to point it out because I don't like to skip over things. I think sometimes we read portions in the Bible and we think, that was a little weird, but I'm going to keep reading. But let's dig into it. Let's be scholars. There's a part here where she says, are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? And you may think, well, what does that mean? It's an ancient Israel law that if a young woman was left widowed without having a son, then one of the deceased husband's brothers was responsible to be a surrogate father, providing her a son. So that seems weird. We wouldn't do that today. But this was ancient law. So she was saying, I don't have any kids that, by ancient Israel law, like they're going to grow up and you're going to marry them, this tradition that they have. So that is different, but that is how they did things back then. I joked also in first service that that's just like Jerry Springer stuff. Weird things, like we would not think of these things happening. We don't think that, like, whoa, that's awkward. But there's a lot of things that was just custom and traditions. So this was one of them. And she says, I don't have any kids, so there's no point in waiting around for me to have another son for you to marry them. And she keeps saying things like, the hand of the Lord has gone against me. You don't want to be with me. Naomi didn't accuse God of doing something wrong against her. I think she acknowledged his control over all circumstances. I think she was experiencing repentance of what she did. She realized that maybe it was on her. Was it her fault? Was she the one who said, hey, Elimelech, let's go to Moab. Let's go somewhere else. Let's leave this place for a little bit. Let's go somewhere else. Is she feeling regret because now her husband and kids died, maybe because of what she did? Was it the opposite, that he wanted to go and she didn't push him enough to stay? We don't know. But I know she's feeling different things. But if she really was mad at God, if she really was angry at God, I don't think she would return to Bethlehem. If she really was angry at what the Lord did to her, she would have run even farther away. But we don't see that. We see her returning because she trusts that the Lord knows better. She trusts that the Lord is going to provide. So she's going to go back. But she's concerned about her daughters-in-law. She loves them. And she just doesn't want to mess them up. But she was trusting in the Lord. She was moving forward herself. We will see later on in this passage, later on in this book, that the main thing here that we're trying to see is that God is going to work all things for good of those who love him, for those who are called according to his purpose. That's Romans 8:28. I was serving at kids' church this Wednesday night, and they were doing the verse, the memory verse for the kids. And I walk in and I sit down and they're trying to memorize it. And Levi Carrasco's like, I got this. And he gets up and does the whole Romans 8:28. And he sits down and I was like, dude, that was awesome. And he's like, well, we've been studying for weeks. I was like, oh, okay, cool. My bad. It's an awesome thing to see our kids are learning the Bible. It's encouraging to me, especially a verse like that, because as soon as he read that verse, I'm like, wait a minute. That's what we're talking about, right? God is going to work all things for good for those people who love him. And he will. They move on. As they keep arguing, Ruth says, hey, I don't care what you say, I'm going to go with you. And for Ruth, this was a big deal because this wasn't just moving. This was total relocation. She was going to forsake her gods, her Moabite gods she used to worship. She's going to embrace the God of Israel. She was choosing to follow the Lord. She was a Gentile woman who's choosing to follow the Lord because of the faith Naomi had. David Guzik, one of my favorite Bible commentators, has this quote. He says, people should be able to look at your life, just as Ruth looked at Naomi's, and say, I want your God to be my God. Your trust in God and turning towards him in tough times will often be the thing that draws others to the Lord. And what's interesting about the impact Naomi had on Ruth's life is that Naomi didn't have an easy life. She left her home, lost her husband, lost her kids, lost one daughter-in-law now, and still Naomi says, I am going to go back to the Lord. I am going to go back home. That is where I belong. That stood out to Ruth. That's what made Ruth forsake her gods to follow the Lord. Notice it wasn't Naomi's compromise for 10 years. 10 years that she lived in Moab. Nothing she did made Ruth think much of God. But when she was willing to forsake everything and go back for the Lord, that stood out to them. That stood out to her. So, something to think on. Sometimes we think that we're going to persuade our family or coworkers or friends to the Lord by compromising. Right? We don't want to be that pushy coworker. We don't want to be that pushy family member. We don't want to shove the Bible down our throats. We just, distance, respect. One day they'll come around, right? That's what we tell ourselves to kind of feel better. It's hard to be rejected when people are talking about the Lord. I get that. But only a bold stand for Jesus is going to do it. There's one thing about giving someone space, but that's different than just not being with them at all, not trying to influence their life, not trying to pray for them, not being an example. That's very different than giving them space. Charles Spurgeon has a quote on this. He says, you will never win any soul to the right by a compromise with the wrong. It is the decision for Christ and his truth that has the greatest power in the family and the greatest power in the world too. And don't we want to make an impact on the lives of those around us? We don't compromise. We lead by example. We lead them to Christ. That is what Naomi was doing. She was leading by example. The Lord was calling to her and she answered. And by her answering to the call of the Lord, Ruth received her salvation. Before I worked at a church, I worked at a construction company for years, and it was fun. I learned a lot of things. And I wasn't the only Christian there, but I was the youngest guy there, and they teased me a lot about me being a Christian. If they cussed, some of them would apologize, like, oh, sorry, Gabe, I know you don't like cussing. And, I kind of liked that they respected me enough to apologize for cussing. But there was this one guy, this one coworker who loved to do it. He loved to cuss or share an inappropriate joke and look at me. Just, what's he going to say? Like, hoping I was going to lash out, hoping I was going to get mad. But I didn't. I tried to keep my cool all the time because I knew what he was doing. And for years, I got to know him, and I liked him because he was, even though he was in his 40s, he was like a teenager. He was young. Like, he listened to rock music, and he wore shorts and tennis shoes to work and had Metallica t-shirts on all the time. And I'm like, this is a construction company. You're showing up with like a Metallica t-shirt. Like, all right. You know, he was just young at heart, very young at heart. And I liked him, but he, you know, we had that tension between us. He was always trying to see what I would do. And one day, our boss put us together to work. And we had never really worked together alone for the whole shift. We were picking up materials, dropping them off, picking up trash, throwing it away. We were together for a full 8 hours. And on their drive, he was messing with the radio, and he's like, hey, you know, you don't put on your station that you listen to. And I'm like, no, we don't have to do that. And he's like, no, put on your station. And I know he was trying to do something, I can tell. So I put it on KGBA, which I always did, and a very hilarious moment, not then for me, but now. I turned it on KGBA, and the first thing the preacher said was yelling, if you don't repent, you will burn in hell. And he's looking at me like, that's a cool God you got there. You know, it's all about hell with you guys. And I thought, and I said, whoa, it's true. I'm like, do you go to church? And he's like, I did a long time ago. If I go to church now, like, the building will burn. You know, people like that who say that all the time. Oh, you know, I've sinned so much. And I'm like, well, I have a cool church you can go to, you can join us to. And he's, why? I'm like, well, do you want to live like this forever? If you're just saying you know who God is, why do you want to live like this? And he's like, I came to terms a long time ago. I'm going to go to hell. And I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. I like drugs. I like sleeping around. I love listening to my music. None's going to change that. So if I'm going to go to hell, I might as well enjoy my life. And I said, okay, but it doesn't have to be like that. And he spent time opening up with me about his life and things that he did and why he thought he wouldn't be a good person to go to church. And it was a lot of back and forth. And he ended it abruptly at one point and said, you know what, but I'm not going to change my mind. I'm going to do what I want to do, and that's it. You're not going to convince me otherwise. And at that moment, I thought, I could end it here. I don't want to be that pushy coworker. We're driving in a truck together, you know, so I don't want to be that guy and make it awkward. But I did feel what I know now is the Spirit of the Lord telling me to keep pushing, to keep asking, to keep challenging him. So I did, and I kept asking him questions, and he kept, you know, it was a back and forth, and asking questions about this and that. And this is at the time that I had been going to Bible college, so I had all this fresh, you know, scriptures and memory verses, and I was like, oh, well, this and this and that. And we're just talking back and forth, and I can tell that he was getting frustrated, but so was I, because he was being honest with me, and I was being honest with him. Dude, you need God. There's nothing else to it. I'll get to God if I get to God. Okay. Day's over. I go home, and I feel a little guilt. I feel like, man, did I push too much? Did I do the thing we're not supposed to do as Christians, is just push people too much, and then we turn them away from God? I shared the gospel with him many times, but I was like, you know what? Let me just send an apology text, but also just throw the gospel in there one more time. Hey, I send out a text. I'm sorry if I pushed you too much today. I just want you to know that the Lord loves you, and no matter what you've done, that there is forgiveness of sins. You just repent, come to the Lord. I want you to come to church. There is hope for life. You don't have to come to terms with the fact you're going to hell. I just want you to know I love you. I hope I didn't push you too much. And, you know, hope all is well. See you Monday. And he didn't reply to me. I thought, figures. And then I didn't see him at work on Monday. I got a call the next day that he was driving on 111 and he ran into a semi-truck and he died that next day. And I felt intense guilt, thinking, should I have tried more? Should I have done better? Should I have not let him out of his car until he confessed? Should I have got my water and baptized him and like, now you can leave? You know, should I have done more? What was I supposed to do? I felt guilt and frustration, then anger, and it took me a while to process that. But today, years later, I get to look at it a different perspective. I don't think it was a coincidence that the Lord put he and I to work together the day before he died. I don't think it was a coincidence that we spent the whole day driving around. I don't think it was a coincidence that when he shut me out, I felt the burning sensation in my soul that was the Spirit saying, keep talking. So I did. It wasn't a coincidence that the day before this man died, the Lord sent some young punk that goes to Bible college that's super zealous to talk to him all day about salvation. And I do genuinely think, I'm not trying to sensationalize everything, I do genuinely think I'm going to see him in heaven. I think in his last moments, he's going to remember the 8 hours of drilling that I spent the day before talking about redemption, grace. Call out to him. Anytime his arms are open, he wants you. I have no doubt. But what would have happened if when he said put on the radio and I said, let's just listen to rock? If I just quenched it right there, the Spirit was saying go, and I said no, turn it off. Let's just put radio on, hang out, do our thing. How many times does that happen in our lives every day? That the Lord is saying, here's an opportunity. Here's a coworker. Here's someone sitting next to you in line, at the bus station, at work, at the restaurant. How many times do you feel the Spirit saying, go talk to this person? And we say, no, I don't want to be that pushy Christian. And what if that is the Lord putting us in the path of these people to be a difference in their lives? What if we don't even know, which is the crazy part, we don't even know when we could be the last person these people talk to. We don't even know when they're about to break down, lose everything, make a big mistake because of their sin. And they're just, man, I hope someone talks to me. I need the Lord. And they'll think, but how am I going to know the Lord? And the answer is us. The answer is the Lord's probably prompting you. Go talk to the person. He needs me. He prayed for you this morning because he needs you. Go. And we don't. And that's the challenge that I see here with Naomi is she heard the calling of the Lord and she went. And because she went, Ruth got to follow. And because Ruth got to follow, we'll see in the next couple of weeks how the story unfolds. Because of obedience. But what would have happened if she didn't? What would happen if she stayed in Moab? Or if she went even farther away from the Lord? And I want to challenge you with that. What would happen if you, not if you didn't do it, what if you did reach the people around you? What if you woke up every morning and prayed, Lord, I don't know what you want to do today, but I want you to use me. Fill me with your Spirit. Fill me with your wisdom. Fill me with your power. I know there's people that need you. Use me. Here I am, Lord, send me. What happens if we prayed like that? What would happen to our church? What would happen to our community, to your families, to your work, school? What would happen if Christians actually prayed and actually shared Christ? So Naomi and Ruth travel to Bethlehem, and she comes, and she's still down in a funk herself. They say, hey, look, it's Naomi. And she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. And in English, it doesn't make sense. If you read in the Hebrew, the name Naomi means pleasant. The name Ruth, or the name Mara means bitter. So she's like, don't call me pleasant. My life isn't pleasant. I'm bitter. Call me bitter from now on. Right? So those are little things we'll never know if we just read it. We don't try to study it. But that's what that meant. Why did she change her name? She's still not understanding, which is crazy. She went all the way back to Bethlehem, just her and Ruth. She still feels bitterness in her life. But even through that bitterness, she knew, but I still have to come back to the Lord. In her soul, she knew, I still have to come back to the Lord. And she did. She didn't try to run away from God. And if people asked her, why'd you come back? You left, and you came back without a husband, without your kids, with only one daughter-in-law. Why'd you come back? And she would have said, because I know no matter what, I have to get my life right with the Lord. And that's what we have to do. When tragedy happens in our life, we still have to be able to say, hey, I still follow the Lord. And even though things are tough, I'm still going to cling to him. I think a lot of us here will go through our lives struggling and won't talk about it with people. Won't feel like we have a place to talk about it with people. Like church is that pleasant place where you just go and say hi and eat a good donut and drink coffee and good worship and a message and go home and your cup is full for the week and then it's empty and then you come back on Sunday and fill it. But let me tell you, that's not how church is supposed to be. That's not what your life with God is supposed to be. We want you to know here at this church, Christ Community Brawley, we care for your soul, and not just on Sunday mornings, but all the time. And we know that if you don't have a community around you, we're going to keep losing battles. If you don't have someone to call you out, to keep you accountable, to push you to come to church, to push you to serve, to push you to keep following the Lord, it's going to be very hard. We're going to keep, in our nature, we're going to keep running away from God. You need people to encourage you, to help you. Shameless plug about life groups. That's what life groups are for, because we want all of you to be involved with the church somehow, to be in a group, to have people that know you, that love you. And that's what we're here for, to give you a place to be heard and to be known. I want you, in closing here now, I want you to learn here what Naomi learned. She didn't focus on what she lost. She lost a husband and 2 sons and a daughter-in-law. She lost all kinds of material possessions in Bethlehem, and then when she was in Moab, when we returned, she lost everything. She didn't have anything. She just had Ruth. But we see that because of her faith, because of her coming back to the Lord is going to bless her tremendously. And not just her, and not just Ruth, but the nation of Israel is going to be blessed because of the faith that this one woman had. So my question for you here, my last question here for you is, using this analogy of returning to Bethlehem, what are you waiting for to return to the Lord? What are you holding on to? Why are you not right with the Lord? There are some of you here that have never been right with the Lord. You don't know God at all. What is keeping you from knowing the Lord? If you know, as we study the scriptures, that in the Lord is joy, is peace, is salvation, is hope, future, forgiveness of all your sins. What is keeping you, please tell me, from taking a step and knowing the Lord? From giving him everything, every burden that you have, that you carried in here with this room. What's keeping you from just giving it to him? And for those of you who are Christians, who have been away, who have been in Moab, who have walked away, done your own thing for a while, what's keeping you from coming back if you know that the Lord wants you home? That he's got way greater plans for you than you can even imagine. What keeps us back? What keeps you back? Think about this.